My name is Professor Pretentious. I have my nice Southern iced tea here, ready in theme and in theory to review this new Ryan Coogler movie, Sinners. Welcome back to 40 Videos. This is a 40s Reviews episode. It's been a bit since I reviewed anything. It's been a few months now. In part is because no horror or speculative fiction movies really truly moved me to review. I have some sub-reviewed its that I'm going to post of some other ones that I saw that were fine, not enough to make a full video on, not enough to take all that time editing it and make all the stupid jokes that go along with it. In more part, it was because I actually haven't really seen that many movies in theaters since January. But I would say probably the biggest part is that we had another child about a month ago. So, as a new parent, it's pretty much in my DNA to show you a picture. So, here. Here's another one. Here's my 5-year-old with my new kid. And they both look something like this. When Ryan Coogler started on the scene here, it was a pretty big deal. His first feature movie was very much about Oakland. And I remember seeing it before I'd seen any, before he'd even really made any other feature films. And I absolutely loved it. I was excited to keep seeing him producing movies. And then when I saw he was doing a horror movie, I almost shit my pants. I was so excited. I've been waiting for this one for months. So even with a tiny, tiny little baby and a toddler, I have to make it happen, and I would love to thank my partner for letting me take the time to do this. Oh my God. So one of the things I noticed as I went to the theater and as I'd seen this thing slowly getting marketed more and more was that big budget horror seems to be coming back. And I'm not talking about your sort of standard Final Destination 17 or your Paranormal Activity 12 or Saw 32. Those ones I sort of expect. They're safe. Even though there's diminishing returns, they're still going to keep putting those out, and they might even put them out in premium formats. But the weird thing, in less than a year, we've had 3 major rated R, hard R horror movies come out on IMAX, which is pretty rare. We had Alien Romulus, and then we had Nosferatu, and now we have Sinners. They all found IMAX releases in a market where horror just doesn't really go to the huge screen. When I went there, they're marketing the hell out of this. Maybe it's just in Oakland, where a hometown hero Coogler is something of a deity here, but there were window banners all across the theater. There were cutout displays to market the movie. I mean, they went all out. I don't know if that's just where we live, but let me know in the comments if you saw similar fanfare where you live, because it's interesting to me to see how this movie is marketed. It's a mid-budget horror movie, all things considered, put on massive formats right at the tipping point of the summer movie season. So it's just very interesting to me to see from an economic perspective how this works. One of the cool things I think about this is that Ryan Coogler has come back. He's taken what he's learned at Marvel movies, balancing the big budgets, massive star power, and that precarious House of Cards screenwriting that Marvel Studios demands with their crossovers, with their big event films. And he does something that most MCU directors have yet to do following their induction. He's recovered his artistry. I'd say maybe only one director has done that, which is Taika Waititi, but then again, he came back and put out just a god-awful Thor film after that. Makes an incredibly well-balanced film. The way that I keep saying it, and you'll probably get tired of hearing it, is it just fits. Everything seems to fit in very, very neatly. He conveys the narrative subtly and distinctly. His dialogue is precise, yet also stylish, and he puts all of the budget into the breadth of scenery and period detail, and not necessarily into effects. He puts it into the elements that really engage you with a movie in particular. Now, the cool thing for me is narratively it's a bit of a return to form for Coogler. Namely, back to Fruitvale Station, the first feature film he made. It follows It's another one that follows Michael B. Jordan around his community with family and friends for a single day, and a lot of the suspense derives from our knowledge of the unfortunate ending that's to come. So with I largely don't need to make a spoiler review. You kind of get the idea if you've seen even a split second of the trailers. I won't go into the final endings of things, but a lot of it you will get. So for example, same thing with Fruitvale Station. We know that Oscar Grant was murdered by a BART police officer. So we know how that movie ends. We understand it. The suspense and the tragedy comes from that awareness of watching that life build up so slowly, only to know that it's going to disappear and be taken from us as viewers at the end. We call this one a circadian plot. It's a plot that tends to happen over a very short period of time. But I will say it does help build suspense from the horror perspective. And it helps constrain the story in a way that requires far more creative and naturalistic uses of visual and dialogic exposition. It's refreshing to see in a big budget movie and to see from Ryan Coogler, who hasn't really made an original film since Fruitvale Station. Everything has been based on pre-existing IP. One of the things that's really notable in watching this is that this is an incredibly accessible film. It's accessible, but every element just fits in so inherently well. Vampire lore, the nature of Jim Crow, sharecropping history in the 1930s Depression era South. He has these elements of time and place, and these things could very easily be exploited for this concept of local color, right? Like set decoration that really wink, wink, nudge, nudges you to tell you, hey, we're in the 1930s. Did you know that? Or even cliche. But what he does here is he places every element of this very matter-of-factly into the film so that it feels natural and it never feels performative. There'll probably be a lot of comparisons to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which itself has a stylization, but also has a very natural concept between the set dressing, between costumes, between color correction and cinematography. Really fits that narrative in a way in which it doesn't feel like it's deliberately nostalgic, in which it really immerses you in that time and place. There's some tonal shifts in the film. One is marked by a surreal scene. You'll know it when you get to it. It's somewhere near the end of Act 2, right before the climax. And this is a scene which, in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, might have just taken me out entirely. It might have been something that I just try to forget. Whereas instead, it's something that I want to remember now. With the context of this film, they set from the very beginning this concept of what a griot is, which is an African storyteller who helps bind together culture, who helps bind together beliefs and mythology together in a coherent community structure. And it fit so snugly in a way that elevated the film from what probably is really a familiar plot line to one lined with higher stakes. My 5-year-old asked me, "Tell me about the movie, Dad." And I said, well, it's about these two brothers who come home and they want to start a club with a lot of their friends, and then a bunch of vampires try to kill them. That's basically it in a single sentence. We know that, but what he makes of it is something that's really unique. You're going to have to take with a grain of salt that I have an academic understanding of black art and culture. Surprise, I'm white. I don't like it any more than you do, but here I am. So, African American literature and film was one of my concentrations in my master's degree.
You got your head stuck so far up your ass with your Harvard education, your bullshit, pretentious Buffy ways. Brother man, I'm blacker than you. I'm keeping it real. I'm bad about it. I got the role. You're just fronting trying to be white.
I'm an Orient.
Yeah.
A sellout.
Yeah.
Because I don't aspire to do some homeboys from outer space.
I also know enough, which is really important for people who have an academic understanding, I also know enough to know the limits of my awareness on a very deeply personal level.
Dayla, my man, I'm glad you got your mind right.
Well, it's right, tight, and ready to delight.
Okay, I'm with this.
Yes, I've never really dug deep into my pain as a Negro.
Hey, look, those things, they're hard to look at sometimes.
Yes. And as Mark Twain so fully understood satire,
is the way if we are ever to live side by side in peace and harmony.
Right.
So, my show that I'm pitching is about promoting racial healing.
Healing is great. I like this. Give me more. Go on. Go on.
Now, I know you are familiar with minstrel shows.
I try to bridge this with my students. In my teaching career, my students' reading lists include multiple Black authors, from Audre Lorde to Octavia Butler, from W.B. Du Bois to Claudia Rankine. My 8th graders read all of those this year, and last year and the year before. But again, remember to take any assumptions I make or any authoritative generalizations with one of the things Coogler is playing with here is this idea of history. It is a period piece, so of course it's embedded in that. But he suggests to us that history is a valuable facet of Black culture. It's everything. It's what to learn from. It's what to hold on to. It's embodiment. It serves as a vindication. It serves as a lesson. Serves as a communal bond. This film may have been resonant 8 years ago when Black Panther came out, but now it is essential. Right at a time when history is being deliberately erased from our books, from our websites, all but our memories, we need these widespread reminders just as frequently, even if we're doing it in a fantastical manner. So, one of the things this film goes toward is this idea that much of the African American community was formed as a result of segregation. And this is something that, despite the horrors of it, itself shaped the community in a positive way. Something that Malcolm X attributed a level of mobility within Black communities to. Dignity, he says, comes from Black ownership. And it was a more militant version of what Booker T. Washington had been saying about Black economic mobility during the Reconstruction. One of these things you see is shown with these interactions with the white vampires. And what it does is it deliberately evokes all of the tests that have historically come from white into the Black community. They attempt to entice them with their music and culture, right? To suggest that white music, white culture is superior and should be aspired to. They bring out promises of equality and colorblindness. And then finally, with financial support. Vampirism and whiteness are just very well acquainted with each other. They feel so fitting, especially in relation to blues music. He is pointing out, or at least he's evoking it, in again a very fitting but very subtle way, how blues has such a long history of these predatory practices that promised short-term gain for the musicians from white producers rather than long-term prosperity that might come from publishing rights or residuals. Oftentimes, these performers would sign away their materials, and a lot of times, in a kind of a cruel fate, they were again brought back into popularity from penniless obscurity by the English second wave of rock. You know, your Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and Yardbirds brought them back as opening acts for them. But you see this happening again. History repeats itself. The film Riley jokes. In the beginning, there's a white landowner. He claims that the KKK no longer exists, as if it's like a fantasy or archaic somehow. Michael B. Jordan's characters both scoff, and we as the audience are aligned with this idea that very much so in the 21st century, we are aware that the KKK does very much still exist. The imaginary feature of this evil, the way that this person presents it, it foreshadows the existence of vampires as something, again, they're saying, oh no, they don't exist. They no longer exist. However, this is a recurring evil in America. As they follow the vampire mythos of immortality. So it is suggesting that these things are going to continue until they're reckoned with. In this concept of history is this quote that I think about from James Baldwin. He talks about whiteness. It fits in incredibly well with how we see vampires existing. Baldwin talks about white people in The Fire Next Time. He says, white people are trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. You feel this through these characters, and definitely through the main characters, but you can also feel it through the desires of these largely white vampire characters in the first place. There are a lot of these key elements of Black history that are deeply embedded in the story, from this idea of wage bargaining during sharecropping to increase economic mobility to the value of matriarchy, community, family. And then this balance, this acceptance of the coexistence of both loyalty and opportunism, of Christianity as well as these African diasporic religions that people still practice. The Smokestack brothers utilize their money, but also their communal ties to produce what's called Club Juke, this juke joint that they want to have with food, live blues music, drink, dancing. They also show with their following characters that they bring into the whole situation throughout the day, that there's this openness that from the few white characters we do have, we don't see them afford each other. The setup of the film shows this focus on Black ownership. Stack and Smoke, or Smokestack, are the names of Michael B. Jordan's twin brother characters. And they're both coming back from the wealth that they attained up north in Chicago. In this case, it's from crime, and this is not really a spoiler. You get this sort of from the beginning. They mention they worked for Al Capone. You know, we get it. But they come back in order to invest their newfound wealth back into their community. So they come back down to Mississippi in order to do this. Now, it's up to debate. I imagine a second viewing would illuminate how much of this on their part is predatory to try to pander to their community or to try to decrease the value of their lives. But what really seems like the case is that both the twins have the ideal in their minds. They want to create something that is their own for their community, for people to enjoy. Because the title of this film, it's to imply that none of those things are wrong. They're things that white culture, whites would use in the South to debase African American culture, but not something that is in none of these things actually are inherently wrong. He creates homage in a way, going back towards some of the history of some of these films of Oscar Micheaux, who was trying to do the same thing with his community during the silent film era. So one of the clear homages you look at is this title of... So you see this reflecting on and on throughout the story. They never really mention it, but you can continue to look at it as the story builds. In the beginning, obviously, this is the patrons of the club. And within those, you see Sammy, the main character. He is largely the main character that you associate with, or you're meant to sort of navigate this story in this world. He's the uninitiated character. And he's the son of a preacher. He plays guitar. And I couldn't help but be reminded of the way that it evokes the concept of Robert Johnson, who went to the crossroads, made a pact that he would learn how to play guitar, and the devil would take his soul. There's another character named Annie, who is a pagan practitioner. They don't specifically say, but it might be a merging of Vodun and Obeah. Again, she would be implied to be in this evangelic Protestant community. The other ones are both of these brothers. While they're not inherently evil people, they both are very flawed. But obviously, as we see it, it's clear that the vampires are we begin to see the white characters, and the white characters are few and far between in this movie. And they also are deeply racist, deeply problematic characters. So the original vampires themselves all derived from Western countries. Now, we talked about this in Nosferatu. This was the fear of Eastern European people, the race of Eastern European or Semitic peoples coming into white culture. And Coogler kind of takes that awareness and brings it into black culture, which is saying, hey man, they're all white. So making those distinctions is like splitting a hair. So in this film, the original vampire is Irish. And this reminds us of the assimilation that Baldwin discusses. That Irish were not considered socially white. Physically white, yes. But it wasn't until the late 19th, early 20th century that Irish were accepted with half-open arms into whiteness and its definition. And Baldwin says that there's a moral trade that a culture makes for its acceptance into whiteness. It's almost a deal with the devil, as you see. So a lot of scholarship goes into this attempt to define whiteness that Toni Morrison and Baldwin also mention. And it often, almost always, comes up short. And that's where the main point of this is self-evident. That whiteness itself can only be defined by blackness. The idea that whiteness can only be defined by having someone that is subservient, someone that's lesser than. There's always the necessity for a downward comparison with whiteness, because before this, it didn't exist. It was just varying complexions. But whiteness, as what it is, slowly had required more and more definition of blackness. But what this ended up is leaving whiteness as a culture completely devoid of anything. So what Coogler does here is he implicates vampirism into the moral vacuum, that rapacious colonization and acculturation that again and again European and Western culture has committed on other countries. And also this deep emptiness of the culture that defines whiteness in the abstract sense. They even have the need for invitation into black spaces. Now, we know this is part of vampire lore, but he really hammers this one home. And in a beautiful way, from the moment it happens, I thought, oh, fucking genius. Again, it's not subtle, yet it fits so closely, so neatly into exactly what Coogler's trying to say. This need for the invitation into black spaces, which had been deeply protected as a result of segregation even. There's that one. There's also this idea that vampires come at night, and also the white supremacist violence happens at night. The KKK commit their most violent, horrific, brutal acts at night. And then also looking at the content of the vampires' manipulations. Now, vampires, as I talked about in Nosferatu, have not always been sexy, have not always been alluring, but they all have always been manipulative. And what you see in this movie, without spoiling too much, the content of the vampires' manipulations utilizes either racist rhetoric or the liberal apologist talking points. And it even uses colorism as a way of literally and figuratively opening the door to the white vampires in particular. This is such a resonant and unique feature that Coogler stumbles on. I absolutely love it. One of the things he really does from the beginning is he sets the visual language in a way in creating these homages. He uses match cuts in a beautiful way, even like 3 or 4 within the first 15 minutes, both very subtle but straightforward, and they again fit the tone of this movie. They encapsulate that perfect balance of both like symbol and subtlety of it. One of the match cuts involve these reflective eyes. It's one of the ways that we determine who are vampires in this movie. And you see this as a subliminal trick that had been used in horror movies for a while, but most notably in modern horror, you would say it would happen in The Shining, in The Exorcist as well, to suggest the first one is to suggest an altered state, and the second one is to suggest possession. But it can also suggest other things that they show in here. This concept of hatred, of like a burning hatred, of a trapped soul, as they say later on in the movie. Or just simple greed, the glowing eyes of envy and avarice. One of the things, again, you see is doppelgangers. Both of these brothers, they represent this dichotomy as these archetypes of black exceptionalism. One is the loyal community builder. That one would be Stack. He's the one who comes in with good intentions, wants it to be mutually beneficial for everyone, wants to create something in which it can elevate the Black community without the necessity for white intervention. And the other, which is Smoke, is much more of the self-interested opportunist. One who's much more looking out for himself, maybe even just his immediate family, but not necessarily for the community. And you see the doppelgangers fit in. Again, there's some specific Shining references and shots. There's one that they put in the trailer. You'll know it when you see it. That's all I'm going to say. Another one is you see crucifixes. There's some matte shots that use crucifixes in a beautiful way. And also very cool elements of utilizing the phrase baptism by fire fits in very well in this. And of course, the common Protestant baptism through water. I'm just going to say I dislike the word perfect. And the only time I allow its utterance is when it follows the word near or almost. So I'm just going to say it. This movie is near almost perfect. I kept thinking this as it went on. It kept going. It got me in the first 10 minutes. And as it went on, I was like, oh my God. Every potential pitfall or clumsy step that I can anticipate was smoothed over by strong characterization, engaging dialogue, smooth pacing, and outstanding evocative performances. What could have been tropes in the story, as often happen in horror, actually showed up as archetypes in a more mythological realm. Coogler has like a sort of magic with his style that transforms what could have been a mundane narrative, and I feel this way about Black Panther too. And in this case, horror, a mundane horror narrative, into mythology. This stands out as Coogler's, I'd say, second best film out of after Black Panther. Better than Creed, better than the Black Panther or the other Creeds or even Fruitvale Station. And I think this one's going to just stand out as a classic of Black cinema. Full stop. Just going to end it here. Thank you for watching. Keep your eyes open for other reviews, particularly coming up this summer. Some editing always needs to be done with these reviews, but this one was clocked in at about an hour. So if this video does well, I'm going to put up another one with some of the other content that included box office trends, that included a lot of analysis of Black horror, Black literature, and a comparison between From Dusk Till Dawn, Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight, and this movie. So if you're interested, put it in the comments, let me know, and I'll edit that one together. I, again, am Professor Pretentious, and this is 40 Reviews.